I value clean air, though,
Oh, and I think our clean air is actually cleaner than it was.
and addressing our climate crisis.
Well, I would actually like to debate that too, because I think current policies don't show us that we're actually embracing climate change. We're actually doing it worse off because we're actually utilizing more oil and gas that are dirtier than what we produce. So I think we can argue that back and forth.
I think you just made the point of why we need this. So that's
No,
a
I
great
don't
place
think
to
I don't
end.
think
as
I
you
did.
head to the airport.
I don't think I did. The gentleman from Montana, okay. Gentleman from Montana is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Ranking Member Stansberry for holding the hearing today. It is no secret that the administration has used our federal lands to try and implement their most egregious climate and environmental-focused policies. Their actions over these past 3 years have done nothing to help Americans who rely on this land for their livelihoods, and also, despite their claims, have done nothing to keep our American landscapes clean and beautiful. Take, for instance, the Judith Gap in central Montana. Once a pristine expanse, it is now marred by towering wind turbines that disrupt local wind patterns and frequently fail to generate energy during Montana's harsh winter conditions. I've posted online just 3 weeks ago this very event. It's 30 degrees below zero, drove through the middle of the wind farm, and not a single one of the turbines was turning. It's extremely concerning how an administration whose apparent goal is environmental protection could force such a visually intrusive and unreliable energy source onto the American people. And this is just one example of the short-sighted and poorly thought-through policies concerning federal lands and enacted by this administration. Consider the Conservation and Landscape Health Rule proposed last summer, which initially seemed like another instance of the administration appeasing the climate zealots. However, subsequent developments revealed a much more concerning agenda. The Conservation Lease BLM rule, which clearly violates the Taylor Grazing Act and the BLM's mandate for multiple use, appears to pave the way for leasing parcels of land to natural asset companies. While public outcry and this committee's intervention compelled the SEC to retract its plan for natural asset companies, recent information suggests that the group behind this scheme is undeterred. The notion of commodifying public land for foreign entities and prohibiting the resources that are located on the land from being developed, allowing them to profit from taxpayer-owned resources while treating water and air as commodities is truly dystopian. With all this in mind, and while it should be no surprise that the other 3 witnesses did not come here to defend their decisions by testifying today at this committee hearing, I have several questions for you, Mr. Murkowski. First and foremost, thank you for your willingness to come in and testify before this committee and showing the courage that unfortunately the other witnesses lacked. However, with that in mind, how do you square your agency's conservation lease rule with its blatant violation of the Taylor Grazing Act?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. The public lands rule is really driven by our multiple use and sustained yield mission, and will help us better to manage the resources across the landscape while ensuring a sustained yield for future generations of Americans. I think we might have to agree to disagree on its interaction with other laws, but I personally am not an attorney and would refer to the department's attorneys on the relationship between the Taylor Grazing Act
So
and the
what I will
proposed
tell you
rule.
is that the Taylor Grazing Act calls for, and is in statute, that the priorities are for agricultural purposes, much of which is to sustain food sources for people across the United States. This was put into place back in the 30s, and that's when they were focused on that. And now the BLM rule is literally taking conservation measures and placing it above that food production, that agricultural use, which is completely in contrast to the statute itself. And so that's why we've had so much of a problem watching BLM propose a rule that truly is in conflict with the statute itself.
Congressman, as I noted, the proposed rule really derives from our obligations under FLPMA. It doesn't elevate conservation above other uses, but ensures that we're providing for adequate conservation use alongside other multiple uses so that we can deliver a sustained yield for future generations of Americans across our public lands.
Regarding the SEC and New York Stock Exchange recently withdrawn rule regarding the natural asset companies, do you see any issue with allowing foreign countries or entities to invest in and control U.S. federal lands and profit from prohibiting the use of the resources that are located on those lands? Do you see any problem or conflict with that?
Congressman, I'm only familiar with the SEC's proposal from what I've read about it in the popular media, but the department has been quite clear that we were not involved or engaged in the SEC process, so I would hesitate to speculate on how that might play out if it were adopted.
So I just got down to it. Mr. Chair, I would yield back. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In October